Hey everyone, welcome to another Hygraph live stream. I'm usually going to just talk to you for a little bit at the beginning of one of these, but I've got some special guests today, so I want to make sure that we get straight to it and chat with them a little bit. So I'm going to welcome today from the Astro team, Matthew Phillips, the CTO, and Matt Kane, one of the core maintainers. Gentlemen, welcome. And Matthew, you're muted, so just know that. How's it going today?
Hello. Good to be here.
Can y'all give a quick intro for yourselves?
Yeah, sure. We're the two Matts on Astro on the part of the core team. Yeah, both part of the core team. I was with the start of the project with a few other people. Built up Astro initially purely static site generator and kind of evolved it from there to be, obviously still focused very much on that story on static sites, and this particular feature is very, very pointed towards that as well. But have grown it over the last couple years, and now we are here today talking to you.
Nice, excellent. And Matt, how about you?
Hi. Yeah, so I'm Matt Kane. I'm one of the core maintainers on the Astro project. I've been working at the Astro technology company for about 4 months now. And I was at Netlify before that, and then Gatsby back in the past. I also make the Unpick image framework, which is multi-framework image components. But yeah, so but for the past few months, I've mostly been working on building the content layer at Astro which is in Astro 5.
Nice. Which that's a perfect segue. It's like you do this for a living, to the fact that y'all just released a new beta last week, right? The 5.0 beta. Let's talk a little bit about that. What's involved in the beta, and then we'll get to our core topic today.
Yeah, okay. 5.0 is we're hoping to release this, towards the end of the year. But we want to get a head start on things, introduce some new features that we've been working on over the past 4 or 5 months or so. So some of the big things in this are content layer, which is what we're going to talk a lot about today. But in addition to that, we have a feature called Server Islands. Server Islands is something we introduced back in, I think it was June, as an experimental feature within Astro. And what this allows you to do is to have kind of the outer shell of your page be static. Could be pre-rendered. It might just be, content that is rendered on a server, but with a very more highly cached. And then you have different server islands within the page. Those things are completely dynamic. And some kind of use cases here are things like e-commerce, where you might want to, you have, like, for example, a product page. That product doesn't change that often, but the user is logged in. They have their own icon. Perhaps there's some more personalized content, or more dynamic content, such as like special flash sales, things like comments, these things that are highly dynamic. You want to pull those live. So what it really does is give you a way to have extremely fast, kind of the main content of your site, of a page, come in right away, with the more dynamic bits coming in later. It's still very fast. It's still optimized to load more quickly, but they are not able to get that instant loading of the rest of the content. So yeah, it's really, really exciting feature. It's great for things like e-commerce, like I said, and it is now stable as part of the beta. So definitely check that out. And another big feature is, I kind of mentioned before, we started out Astro completely for static sites. Then later we added server mode. So basically you could make it so that your Astro site generates a server, and it could run in Netlify or Cell in just Node.js itself. So kind of two completely opposite ways to output. But there's a lot of in the middle, right? There's a lot of well, this page could be pre-rendered, like it's completely, it's my marketing page, or it's the about page or whatever. And then, there are other pages which are more dynamic because it's got a user admin panel or something like that, right? So hybrid mode gives you a way. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to jump in and say, this feature right here is such a small thing, but I'm super excited about it. Like I haven't used it yet. Super excited because I do this a lot. Lots of static, a little bit of dynamic, and it's
yeah. So we've had what we call hybrid mode for a long time, and what basically what hybrid mode means is that by default all of your pages are static. You can say, as in this example here, export const pre-render equals false, and that particular page and only that page will not be pre-rendered. That will be server rendered. So we've actually had that for a while, but what became complicated is all these different output modes. There's server output, there's static output, there's hybrid output. And what we realized is that static output and hybrid output are kind of the same thing. They both default to static, but one of them allows you to create a server and the other just doesn't allow you at all. So we were kind of like, well, we can just combine those into one. So you really only have two modes, which are things are static by default or things are server rendered by default, really. And that's kind of what the change we made. So it's output static, output server. Kind of all it really does is flip the default, whether things are pre-rendered by default or not.
Yep.
So yeah, that's a pretty exciting new feature. It's just really a simplification of stuff we already had. But yeah, pretty excited about that one as well. And then last up, I guess I could say Astro Imp. This is a feature that's been out for a while. I think we introduced this back in May, I believe. It's now stable. What Astro Imp does is it allows you to describe the types, basically provide a schema for the types of your environment variables. That way you get features such as if you start your dev server and you don't have client IP URL in an environment variable, it's just going to go ahead and crash right away and tell you this is required, right? Like there's no point in even trying to start the dev server without this environment variable. It doesn't work. It also gives you the ability to get like autocomplete when you import and you get environment variable. You can have types, you can say this is a number, the port is a number. So you get back a number. It also gives you like access control. You can say, this is accessed only as a secret. That is, it's something that only the server should have access to versus this is something that's public, the client can have access to. That way you can prevent mistakes like, oops, I accidentally, got my API key in the client and now it's exposed to the world. So yeah, pretty excited about this one.
Yeah, and this kind of goes, and not topic for today overall, but like the kind of the philosophy of Astro since the beginning, where like pretty much immediately, or at least soon after y'all launched, the Markdown was type safe, right? The front matter was typed. All this stuff that people didn't think about in the past that's nice to have typed, including now environment variables, where it's like I never would have personally thought typing environment variables. That sounds super strange, but it makes perfect sense once you think about it.
Yeah, it just gives you, I mean, you wind up writing a bunch of manual code that's like, oh, does API secret exist? If not, throw an error, and it's just like, it kind of takes away all that boilerplate, I guess.
Yep. So we're going to scroll back up and we're going to talk about what we're actually meant to talk about today, which is the new content layer, right? And Matt, you mentioned that you have been working on this for the past couple months. Let's talk a little bit about it. What's new about content layer?
So what since like Astro 2.0, I think we've had support for content collections, which was it's a way of managing the content on your site. It gives you a way to organize it all in one place, and you can query it. You can do get collection and get entry, but it's very much focused on local content, particularly local Markdown, MDX, MarkDoc, and some JSON files as well. So, and that's great and has worked really well for a lot of people, but it's worked so well that people want more from it. So it's very shortly after it was launched, people have been asking, but I want to be able to include files from elsewhere in my repo or elsewhere on disk, or why can't I use content collections with my remote CMS, for example? And it's obviously something that people ask for a lot, and it's we've taken our time to work out what's the best way to do that, and this is what content layer is. So it's the next iteration of content collections. And we've called it content layer because it's like a unified place for having all of your data that you've got in your site. And so the way that it works is you have this definition of a loader. So you want a collection of something, of anything. It can be pages, it can be, images, or any sort of content that you want to use on your site. And then you have a loader, which what the loader does is it just defines how that content is loaded. So, if you want this data, you need to call this loader and use it to do the loading. Now, by default, Astro comes bundled with 2 built-in loaders. There's the glob loader, which effectively is doing what content collections used to do. So you give it a lot of files on disk, it goes through them and creates an entry for each file. It makes it all type safe. You can define a schema for it, and it works with Markdown and MDX and MarkDoc and YAML, and so you can put all of those in there, and it works in a very similar way. The main difference is it is a lot more flexible. Instead of just having a folder in one place that is like flat, you can, because it's a glob, you can put your files wherever you want. You can nest them and work out your own directory structure. We also have the file loader, which is for if you've got a single file with lots of entries defined in it, say like an array of authors. That's a really common one. People have an array of authors for their markdown content or something, and you want to look it up. Now you can stick them all in one file. It's pretty basic stuff, but makes a big difference being able to have it. And conceptually, that was not something that was possible because of the way that content collections were done before. But because of this loader pattern, it's a lot more flexible. So this means that we can start with those basic loaders that are doing kind of the sort of stuff we were doing before, but more flexibly, more powerfully, more performantly, and then say, this is a generic pattern. This is, I want some data. It's just I want some structured data that I'm going to be that's going to be in a typed way, and I want to be able to load it. And so we have now this interface for loaders. So I think then, we will talk about them in a bit more detail, but effectively this is just a way of defining how you want to get your data. And what we want is this to be, every site, when you're building your site, if there's data, there's content that you want at build time, then this is going to be the easiest way to do it. And it's, as you alluded to, one of the Astro things is that we like everything to be typed because it gives you the best editor experience and best type, error handling and everything. So this is also then all typed just automatically. It just works, with a lot of these things. So this is kind of the basis of what we're doing there, and it's this kind of unified layer for being able to get all of the content that you need into your site in a common way, and then being able to query it in the same way everywhere. So, get collection, get entry. Dead simple. It's not, this isn't a MySQL thing. This isn't, some planet scale or whatever. This is not a complex database, but this is a way of getting a collection of content and grabbing an entry and saying, I want a blog post. I've got an entry that contains the page, and that's what I'm going to do. So that's the basics what content layer is.
Yeah, and we're gonna dive in to some code here in a second, but I'm kind of curious. So like we have a Hygraph loader. Thanks for all the help that you've given me in writing that, because I'm not the biggest tool creator in the world. So that's been helpful along the way. But one question that I think might come up overall, and I know the answer, so this is a softball question, but if I have a Hygraph loader and I'm going to be using that and doing it in this new methodology, is this the only way I can pull in third-party API, or can I still use the old way of doing it in my front matter with a lovely naturally async function up top?
I think.
Okay. Well, I was going to say that, you definitely still can do that. That was, it took us a while to land on content layer API a little bit, because we were like, oh, you can do it this way. Like, if you want to load this, like, is content layer really better? Because we kind of wrestled with, there's so many potential features to add to content collections, and sometimes it feels like, well, we don't want to have content layer until we have a database, because the whole reason to have content layer is to have a database, and you can like query things, have relations between them and all that sorts of thing. And we have like primitives for relations and stuff like that, but it's not actually database backed. So we kind of struggled with that a little bit, where it didn't feel like the right time because we didn't have these other pieces in place. Until eventually landed on, well, we just kind of have to get going somewhere, and like this is the right place. But to answer more directly, like you still want to do that if you want to get live data in an SSR app, if you want the ability to add a blog post or whatever and have that automatically available without doing some type of ISR setup where you rebuild your site on a change, which you can do as well, and that's useful. But for today, that would still be a reason to do it the old way.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, this is definitely an augmentation. It's an extra way of handling your data. It gives you the benefit of a kind of unified API that works the same, and simplified API that means that you can have a lot of this abstracted away, but it in no way prevents you using the other APIs in there. And we don't want to be tying your hands on this. We're not even saying that this is always the best approach, or we're not deprecating the other ways of doing it. We're saying this is a new way of doing it, that giving you an extra tool that makes you able to handling these things, particularly when it's the a concept of a single page to a single entry. That's where it is really shining. But it's definitely an additional feature rather than necessarily being a replacement.
Yeah. And the nice thing is it keeps that same philosophy of that kind of static first, let's get the most performant way of doing it. And then you can go SSR if you need to for the right things. Or I don't know, maybe in the future, right? Server islands, right? It feels like all those puzzle pieces, I can see how they're like the gravitational pull of them, and they're kind of all coming together sometime in the future, it sounds like.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the impetus for creating this feature was not necessarily remote data, even though obviously that's a huge reason to do it now. But it was really like, and Matt mentioned, we have the file loader now, and it was that kind of thing. Because when we created data collections, which data collections kind of don't exist in the new content layer approach, but data collection was, JSON files, essentially a collection of JSON files. And even when we first created those, we were like, do you want, Matt.json and Bryan.json and Matthew.json, or do you want authors.json in array? And we're like, well, I feel like you want it one big file probably, but that doesn't really work with the way it currently works. Should we special case it? So that was one big use case. And another, which is also about local data, was something like a courses. People nested collections, essentially. This is something people ask for a lot, is they'd say, hey, I'm building a course on GraphQL, and there's going to be different lessons, and different lessons have different steps. And like, these are kind of, separate collections within your thing. And it really matters to people. Like there was a way to do this, but they all had to be kind of top level folders inside of source content. And people, of course, they want to organize their data in a way that makes sense. And it just didn't really work super well. So that was another use case for doing that. And the glob loader gives you the flexibility to do that.
Yeah, and a big deal on that, right, is that as much as we like sometimes authoring in Markdown, and we like the file-based router and stuff like that, like sometimes your content needs to be treated as data, right? And you need to be able to reconfigure the way that's being displayed. And if all of your one course was in modules, and those modules were all just marked down on a file, you can't easily rearrange that. But if you had nested subtree of all the modules, then you could, if you wanted it to be one page, you could make it one page. Or if you wanted it to be multiple, or if you're gating some of the content but not others, all these things become available because your content is not HTML or Markdown. It's true data that you can refactor however you need to.
Yeah, we've essentially, one of the other things we've done in this is erase the distinction between the two. Everything is content, everything is data. You can render things if you want. You can load the individual data from front matter in a file, or you can render content that you've loaded from a CMS. It's not restricting you or saying that these things are different in any way. So that's one of the things in there. And I think this is part of it, is that, as Matthew was saying, we approached it initially as a way of being more flexible for the files on disk. But from that, we wanted to create a very generic way of doing it. And we put in some like extra help for making it useful for certain use cases. But the idea is that we want to be completely agnostic. And if you can return structured content in an async function in some way, you can write a loader for this. It can be used for absolutely anything you really want. Obviously, not everything makes sense, and I think and it doesn't even need to be things like APIs. So like one of the loaders that I built is one that just produces mock data, and you could just tell it what sort of content you want in there, and it generates mock data, and it's not hitting any APIs or anything. It's doing it at runtime. And I think that the idea is that you can be putting data in and content in however you want. And I think this is the approach we're taking here. Is we're taking it step by step. We're building the underlying primitives that are going to help take this forward. So what we are showing here in 5.0 is this, the starting point for this new way of doing the data. We started off with the content collections, which were, just local data in a very structured place on the disk. Now we're opening it up to be like a more flexible underpinning for this. And this is the first step on that. We're going there, and we'll be adding extra capabilities. And I think one of the things that we've done, or the Astro team has done over the years, is take a kind of mindful approach to how these things are developing. We've not jumped in to start implementing things straight away. We've waited around to see how people are using things, how the ecosystem is going, and making sure that we get each step really working really well, and make it work really well for certain use cases, and then see where the extra use cases might be best served. So we started as a static site generator effectively. Then we added the extra support for SSR, and then we added, things for endpoints, and now we're adding more dynamic things, and we added client islands, and now we're adding server islands. But each one of these has been added with a lot of thought about who this is going to help, and what this is going to unlock because we don't just want to stick every cool new thing in there, however tempting it is to a lot of us. We like the new shiny as well, but I think this is the approach we're taking for the content layer as well. We're building the simpler cases first, and then seeing how that goes next.
Yeah, and I want to say, like, one interesting thing. This goes about like a minute back in what you were saying, but when you can make your own custom stuff around this, it opens up new and interesting doors, right? Like, I actually, right before y'all announced the beta on this, I was actually working towards something for my personal site where I'm pulling some of my content from a CMS, some of my content from Markdown, because I implemented the CMS later and I didn't want to import all my Markdown. I just wanted it to live forever as it was, because it worked. And I did all that. I wrote the site in 11, one of my other favorite frameworks. And I was porting it to Astro, and I'm still in the process of porting it to Astro. But like, reworking that logic was not a struggle, but it was an interesting thought process, because the Markdown was rendering in the content component and all these things. So now I haven't gone back and done this yet, but now I want to write a custom loader that brings the CMS data, the file-based data, and then does the render on both of them. So I just had the one content component coming out of it. So I can actually put all that logic, not in my template, which is where I was having to live before, but in my data layer instead. And I think that's a nice way of looking at it too.
It's interesting that you give that as an example, because one of the things that we haven't explored in great depth yet, but I'm hoping that people that have got, know this sort of thing better than I do, which is things like having templates that are more back-end agnostic. If you have the ability to build a template that uses content collections, but it might be plugged into Markdown, or it might be plugged into a CMS, or it might be plugged into a load of TOML files if you're that way inclined. And but as far as the front end is concerned, it's get collection, get entry, render. It doesn't need to know in great detail and what the loaders can do and what you can do in the schema in the content collections. So we didn't talk much about the schema, but this is one of the things in there. So I'm going to take a slight detour in there. But one of the things that you can do inside a content collection is define a schema using Zod. And so Zod, for people who don't know, is just a way of defining the shape of your object, defining a schema that allows you to both parse and validate your data, but also generate TypeScript typings from it as well, all from a single thing. But one of the things you can do with it is also transform the data. So what you could do is have a common interface that you would do for these particular pages. You can then use a loader to define a collection using whatever data source you want to do, and then have it transform inside the collection definition into a common format. If you've just, in the simplest cases, you want to have a title and a published date and the body content and, that kind of thing. Obviously, you could go a lot more complex. If you're doing an e-commerce thing, you could have a common interface for a product and that kind of thing. And then you can build a template on top of that works whatever data source you're using. And I think this is something that I'm really hoping that the community in particular can have a look at as these things are being developed in 5.0, and people are kind of flexing their muscles a bit and giving it a kick and seeing how it works for them. But I think this is one of the kind of aspects of content collections that I think we haven't talked about so much. Is not only is it a way of having an easy common way of loading data, but it's also a way of projecting that into a common interface so you can render it in the same way with the same sort of page. And and I say templates, but it could also be like component libraries and things like that as well. And Zod schemas are composable too, so you could have a single frame schema type that you just import and export from it as well. So this is the sort of thing that you can do there. So in your scenario, you could have these things loading and then transforming them so that they're both in the same format, even if they're separate collections, for example. You could have them transform the data so that they are both in a common format.
Matt, you're gonna need to stop, because literally my brain is exploding. Because no, like in all seriousness, right? Like we see a lot of, I'll just say it, like in the headless CMS world, right? Like there's lots of people that are trying to build these additional pieces of like live preview functionality, and a lot of them are trying to build it on top of like a CMS agnostic world, right? And what you're saying, and I could be slightly wrong here, and if it's something like let's pivot if so, right? Like wave me off. But like it seems like this and the future of the data of the content layer, right, could almost function as a true like data normalization layer as well. So you could take in 5 different types of data, run it through this, and you get the same, like you said, the same schema on the other side, the same data, all the variable names are lining up, so that you could create maybe not on the live preview stuff, right, or the like clickable preview and all that, but on the templating side, right? Like I could go sell my own custom Astro template and say, you can bring any headless CMS data because I've got these integrations in this loader in this way, and you just plug it in and it works.
Yeah, exactly. And you can start with Markdown, and then you can say, actually, I need more from, and I want to collaborate with my colleagues, and Markdown, we love Markdown, but most people who don't have GitHub accounts are not so keen on editing files. We can go, okay, right, let's add in a headless CMS, and we've projecting these all into a similar format, and we don't need to change our page. The complicated part is in the data model, and that can be handled inside the content collection definition, and you're not needing to go through all of your templates and saying, oh no, suddenly it was called published date in one, and the other one it's called published. this can be all handled in the top level area, and keep these things in one place. And this is one of those places where you can say, actually, this is a scenario where it's better to not be sticking your API calls in your front matter, for example. API calls in front matter is very convenient, but then you are very tightly coupled to the way that you are making these queries. And it's the same if you're changing your schema and things as well. Even if you're doing it, just not moving your data source, by keeping this thing in your collection definition in a separate place from your presentation. I'm getting old school here. This is like MVC type kind of thing, but really it is just a way of having a kind of standardized approach to having your data and being able to then, present it in a certain way, and having that kind of contract there that you can say, this is what my data is going to look like. Don't you worry your head about how I'm getting that data or where it's coming from. Just know that I'm going to provide you data in this shape, and you can make it look beautiful and make it interactive in these places, and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of like, if you think about this more as just a way of abstracting the data away, and this is one of the things that we're saying. It's like, this is an abstraction, yes, and you don't want to abstract stuff too early, but most people are wanting to just load data in a pretty common way. For when you're building a page, you're going to be getting all of your pages as a collection to display, if you're wanting to, list them to generate static paths or whatever, and you're going to want to get a single entry when you're displaying that page. This is going to be the majority thing, and this is able to do that, and able to do it in a way where you don't need to think about the data model of everything at every time. And obviously, I am talking on a Hygraph stream here for people that like data models, and I worked at Gatsby on GraphQL APIs, and some of us love GraphQL queries. One thing I learned in my years at Gatsby is lots of people find GraphQL quite confusing, and if you can abstract that stuff away and let people dive into it when it's needed, but only when it's needed, I think that's the sort of thing that this is helping for. And much easier to do get entry blog hello world rather than query blogs all blog entry slug equals whatever. And I think this is the point about giving you these extra tools, the tools for doing it in the 80% way, and then if you need the other bits, you can dive in and do those in a different way.
Yeah, I really wish this idea of data versus presentation separation. I wish we'd lean even more into that on the very early days. We didn't, because we were really thinking about ease of use, ease of getting started. You just throw an MD file into your source pages directory, and there's your thing. And that breaks down very, very quickly when you want to do something like, I want to show a list of my blog posts. Well, you can't do that because there's no way to do that. So we added APIs allow you to do that, and eventually we're like, no, it actually needs to be separated. But if I were building Astro from scratch today, I would make even a harder separation. There's a lot of value in the idea that your code for your app, the actual thing that generates pages, that's its own application, and the data is just data that gets fed to it. You can imagine having separate repositories of your data versus your thing, and you just build your site, and it's almost like its own little executable program, and you just feed it data. So from a performance aspect, there's great value in doing that. And we already see that in content collections now, even in the previous version. Matt, I don't think you talked about this yet, but there's pretty great performance improvements that we gained from content layer.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think maybe just before I go on to we talk about the performance, I would sort of want to carry on from your original thing about the separation part there. I think what we also need to make clear is that I also mentioned that I worked at Gatsby before. I worked on the framework there.
Yep.
I think that's a great counterexample as well. We don't want to make it so rigid there that you're writing a GraphQL query to display an image. We are wanting to make this easy to use as well. So this is simple to use there, and if you and we give you the escape hatches where you need them as well, and for the simple case, because hitting an API when you just need a bit of data, we love it. It's good. It's an easy thing to do. So we want to keep that open there. But yes, as Matthew said, one of the other benefits of standardizing things is it allows you to optimize parts of it. And one of the things that we've been able to do, particularly with Markdown, but also to a lesser extent with some of the other data sources, because those are the ones that we've got a direct one-to-one comparison with from the previous version, we can very easily compare them. With the Markdown in particular, the performance improvements are massive. We're talking in the range of like 500% faster on there, but also just as important, much more scalable in terms of memory usage. You're not having one of the problems with the way that it was working before is it was generating a path as a module graph as part of the build. So people who know about how things like Vite work, you have to generate a module graph of all of the content in there, and as you add more, it sort of gets exponentially more complex and uses lots more memory and everything as you're getting very, very big. And where an Astro site worked great with thousands of pages, but what we were looking at there is, once you get into the tens of thousands of pages or the high tens of thousands of pages, it was causing things to struggle. And this optimizations that we've been able to make on there have changed it to be a lot more linear in its usage of resources and have opened up future things. So meaning that we are able to build tens of thousands of pages much faster and on a much more constrained machines as well. So if you're building on one of the services like Netlify or Vercel or Cloudflare or whatever, you are able to build it much bigger sites than you were able to before, particularly when you're using Markdown. So there are improvements to performance for MDX and stuff as well, but overall the performance is particularly a lot better on there. But it's also opening up future things to improve that even more. We mentioned about database backends. At the moment it's all just done in memory and persisted to disk, but we want to do a proper data store for the back end, and that will improve the performance even more and make it more scalable. I am determined that we will be able to build hundreds of thousands of page sites without lots of tweaking and lots of maximums free space flags on your Node.js thing. And we want to make these things a lot more scalable for very large content sites as well. So this is a step towards there. It's an improvement. We can get better even more, and this is kind of the way that we're going on that.
And I'll say, as a very average developer, which is kind of how I build myself in a lot of ways, I appreciate all of that, because everything that you've been talking about for the past few minutes, I'm not going to be building. Like that's not what I'm going to be doing in my day to day. So I want as easy as possible to avoid those things and not have to worry about it. And we also have things like, we run into, I think, every headless CMS. I see bug reports on this in lots of GitHub issues on hosts and stuff like that. We run into the idea of like 429s, right? Too many requests over and over again, because when we're working locally, it's fine. We go to build, and then all of a sudden, like, that's just running API request after API request. It's not optimized. Something like this is also going to take care of that in a lot of ways too, because we're doing one call for each content collection, and it's not that big a deal. And I think there's a lot of things that will be coming around that as well. I do want to pivot us now, because I will keep talking about all these philosophical ideas and these like deep things for another 20 minutes, and we won't showcase the actual loader and some of these simple things that I think are really, really interesting. So I'm going to pivot us, and I'm going to go over to some code, and I'm going to showcase, actually, I like to do things as simple as possible. So here is kind of the average, like, not blank, but like the template you get from Astro when you run npx Astro, and it runs you through the CLI, and Houston comes up and says hello. I love Houston. But the one thing that's added here is these three little links. They're not even links. This is so like low end. But I wanted to showcase, this is all coming from The loader that we built alongside y'all for the launch last week, super simple loader. I ran some fun GraphQL things because GraphQL, makes some things better and some things worse. But the thing I want to say is anyone who's looking at making their own custom loader, if your API is bare bones enough and small enough, you can probably build it in maybe an hour's worth of work. It was relatively easy. I was looking at some big use cases and I had to make sure it worked for big use cases, but for simple use cases, building this was a breeze. So really what this amounts to is something that you can npm install. It's the Hygraph Astro Content Loader. And I don't technically have it installed on this one because I'm running it locally, and it's with the built version and all that. And like I said, I'm not a tool builder. There are better ways of doing this. I can use workspaces in npm and all sorts of stuff. But basically, I'm importing the Hygraph loader, and this is kind of that functionality that you were talking about earlier, right? We've got a new variable, and we're using the define collection that comes from the Astro content module, which honestly, I hadn't seen too many places using this kind of colon methodology, and I kind of like it a lot. But then I'm get an object of information, one of which is my endpoint. I'm hard coding that endpoint right now. I could be using an environment variable. I could be using one of the new Astro environments that's typed and making sure that maybe I've got a different, in fact, I've got, the master version of this API, but maybe locally I want to be running off my staging environment. And we have in Hygraph state, you can have, environments that do different things. So I might even want to use the context for that. That would be a great use case there. And then I'm basically telling it what kind of query to run. So in this case, I'm actually using an npm package behind the scenes called GQL Query Builder, which is how we do some things in the way that Hygraph works behind the scenes as well. To basically pass it an operation, I know that I have an API endpoint basically called pages, and then here are the fields that I want from it. And GraphQL Query Builder lets me write it not in GraphQL. And this is important for a few reasons, and I'll kind of show behind the scenes for it. But it's basically an array of fields, and those fields all come from my model. So I have a page model. It has a title, it has a slug, and then it has rich text. So in this case, I'm getting the rich text as just text. It could be HTML, it could be Markdown, it could even be, we have an AST for rendering Markdown. For simple things, I don't go in that direction, but you should absolutely treat your rich text as data and use a rich text renderer for that. And all that's being passed into this loader, and it's returning an API request based on all of that. And then I'm type checking against it with an actual schema that I'm writing in Zod. Now, we went back and forth a little bit while I was building this on whether I should be requiring the schema built here as opposed to maybe generating the schema automatically. And when I kind of looked at this, I don't, as a developer, necessarily in my headless CMS of choice, in this case, Hygraph, I don't necessarily control the API, right? Maybe I have a content architect. There are a few of those in the world. Maybe another set of developers is building the Hygraph interface for my editors. So I don't actually know if my editors have their title as required, or their slug as required, or their body as required. These could all be optional fields in my CMS. So I made the design decision here to require a schema, to say schema, and then I get to use all the cool stuff that y'all have built in behind the scenes to then type check against it. So there's good reason, we could definitely do code gen and do all that and provide the types, but then I don't necessarily know if something's required, and then I'll have to, it's got its own thing. Anyway, so basically what's happening here is that I can then come over to my index file. Instead of writing that API request like we've talked about, I'm just importing the get collection from Astro Content. And I'm just saying get the pages collection. That's it. That's all that I need to do, and then I can loop through it in my template. The fun thing is, one of the things I had to work on to make this a reality was pagination, right? Our API, for performance reasons and all sorts of reasons, when you just request an entire collection of data, there's a max of 100 entries that you get back. So if I wanted to do that here, I could either do Astro pagination, not that big a deal, right? Or I'd have to write my aggregator myself, and I'd have to worry about that data. This is all happening behind the scenes in the loader, and to kind of show that real fast and show that this is not something that only smart people can do, because I am not that. This is all the Hygraph loader is right now. In fact, apparently I'm not using this anymore. So like I'm doing some type checking and stuff like that behind the scenes, but really what all amounts to is an object that takes some things in. Here are those variables that we had in the front end, including the ability to have additional variables I need to pass in. Maybe I'm doing a filter in my GraphQL request, something along those lines, as well as an optional token that you can have in there because you might be completely protecting your API. I'm just using a public API right now. And really, other than some quick error handling and stuff like that, I come down and basically build my HTML query. And I'm doing some stuff that, again, this is all that pagination, all that aggregation that you wouldn't need to worry about if you had unlimited, returns on this. But then down here, I'm returning out all those variables, all the object pieces that are in what y'all provide from this loader, right? I give it a name, which actually, let me rebuild my site real fast so we can see what that looks like. Run dev, and you can see here we've got the Hygraph loader as that name, and it's showing some messages along the way. We're starting to load that from Hygraph, then we're finishing it with 3 items. There are 3 pages coming from Hygraph, and all that's with functionality provided by the API. There's a logger that comes in. There's an individual store that actually, from what I hear, right, persists between builds potentially. So I could also do incremental builds on that.
Yeah.
There's also this parse data. This got me excited, and that's also why I didn't want to do all my type concerns in the loader, because I can parse the data and get the type errors, and y'all give me that functionality. Like my user uses Zod on the config, and then I just check against Zod. I don't do that check. You do that check for me, which I really liked when I saw that. So basically, yeah, I'm just building a request, looping through it all, and then finishing out, right? So I'm actually saying, for each item, grab the item data, check against the Zod schema, and whatever else y'all are doing behind the scenes on parse data. I don't even know. I don't have to worry about that. And then I'm building that store of items with the ability to set an item in the store. And I think it's
so that I can also, if I jump in there as well, the other thing that achieves is that the example I was giving before about being able to transform to a common format, if the schema that the user has defined inside your loader at that point includes a transform, that data that you're putting in the store there is already transformed. So when they're querying it, it is already in the right format that they need. So it means that you've given the user there, by the fact that you're using the parse data thing there, you're giving the user there the ability to transform that data into whatever format that they need in the front end.
Yeah, Matt, I can't remember. Remind me where we landed on, but for Markdown, do we go straight to HTML inside of the store?
It depends very much on the loader. So our Markdown loader, so the ones where it's loading from disk. Yeah, one of the ways that we've managed to get the performance improvements is by pre-rendering the Markdown to HTML. So one of the things that I would suggest that you do here in your loader is to load your HTML, load your raw HTML content, and then you can pass that in as, when you're doing the store set, you can pass in rendered content in there. And then that means that the user can use the content component in the same way as if they were using Markdown Loader. They can literally just drop in a content tag, and that will give you that. So obviously, for something like Hygraph, it's a little bit more complex because obviously you can have multiple rich text fields in there. But if you were wanting to define that in some way, you could say that your content field is so-and-so. And what you would then do is, when you look at store set in there, one of the extra parameters that you can pass in is rendered. And that's the rendered content that you can pass in there is you can pass in as an HTML string. And then that means that the user is just able to use that as a component. And that it's literally as simple that they import the render function from Astro Content. It returns them a component that they can just drop in like any component. And that component is a magic component that renders your actual content.
So let me ask this, Matt, because that's in my brain too, because I absolutely think it'd be amazing just to be able to say content and be done, because I think that's really solid. In fact, that then also solves my other issue with my personal site where I want to marry Markdown and rich text from a CMS together. But when I'm looking holistically, right, when I'm thinking about a lot of different use cases, what I usually recommend for all of my Hygraph users, right, is not actually, we allow you to get HTML from us, right? That's perfectly acceptable. I don't recommend it overall because that's our HTML. It's exactly what you get from actually the Slate, the Slate library that we use. However, if you get it as an AST, as actual raw JSON data, then you can transform it however you want by passing information to a renderer on the front end. So I get more complicated at that point. And it could be that I could actually have a basic content that you could get if you pass that in. But how would you think about rendering when I want to allow my user to basically pass in a renderer? Because there is the ability in Hygraph to embed different models in your rich text. So your images are a model and you can embed that, and that's the obvious use case. But you could also, in your rich text, pass it an item from a product, right? The product item goes in there, and then you could render a related product. But I need to be able to like pass the renderer to that. I need to be able to pass how I'm going to render that.
Yeah. So I think that this is an example of where you want to be able to like pave the different paths that people want to walk. So I think that there is the simple case of, where they just want to render a bit of content in there. And that's the one where you can help them by putting that directly into the rendered content thing in there. But then what you could also offer for the people that need the more complex or richer experience in there is you can give them an Astro component. And because obviously this is all the data, it's still data as well, it's content and it's data, you can just say, create a component that accepts one of those nodes that is the rich text node with the AST and everything that's in there, and you can pass that into it as an Astro component and do all of the rendering and everything in there. And there is, you could have the concept of passing in custom renderers. I think in that one, just use Astro. You have a component, you pass in the data, render it. That's what Astro does. That's what it's great for. So I think that I'm going to betray my lack of knowledge here about whether Hygraph already has an Astro component for rendering rich text directly. If it doesn't, it should, because it would work really well, and I think that's a good thing.
I have a local code base that I played around with that. We have a React renderer. You can bring the React renderer in. Thank you for having all the different ways of doing that. So that is available. It's on my list of things that I do want to have a rich text renderer built in Astro components. I actually have, I think there's a thread in the forums in Discord for Astro where I was like, how do I do this? But yes, absolutely. I'd say that I think it's really interesting. And the other thing is the fact that I've got the logger means that I can also maybe chide my users and be like, I see that you're using the HTML. You might want to be using the rich text renderer.
Yeah.
Here's more information about that. Because not chiding, right? But like educating. Here's the better way of doing it. But yeah, so we have 5 minutes. We did almost no code because the conversations were way too interesting, and I figured people weren't bailing on the audience, so it was a good conversation to kind of show off. So talk to me a little bit before we go about the future of the content layer, because I know that from the conversation today, there's more to come. There's more features that you're kind of seeing how people are using. And, I love the methodical approach that y'all take to make sure that you're doing the right thing. What's the future look like? How do you want people using it right now? And where can they go to learn more about all of this?
So there's a lot in there. I think that it's absolutely the way that people should be starting to use this is if they are already using content collections, giving it a try, seeing how it moves over. It will be better in almost every case for everybody, but we want to see, please let us know if it's causing problems. We want to let us know if it's working great. Make my day. It's telling me that it's 500% faster and you can finally build your giant site. But then start thinking about ways that this could be used. Try the Hygraph loader, try some of the other loaders out there, try building your own loader. I mean, the simplest loader is literally just an array of objects. That's what, if you can do that, if you can fetch something with an async API, and that will work. But
and I'll also
I
pitch
would
real fast.
really love
check the Hygraph YouTube channel, because we did a live stream, was it like 4 weeks ago, I think, where the very basics of where we're at today, I started playing with. So check that out.
Perfect.
You can see
that's perfect. Yeah.
Super novice about all this stuff. I was able to get it done in like an hour. You'll be able to as well.
Yeah. So I would love people to try it out on that. I would love people to just build their sites with it, find the rough edges, and just see what they're wanting from it. And lots of people have been giving feedback of what they want from it. Now, I would particularly like feedback from people who have tried it and see what they feel is missing, because I think that some of the things that people might be thinking they need, maybe they don't need, or some of the things that they don't realize they need, they will need. So I think that the ideal would be for, start off by trying your existing content, see how that works. Let us know if you're having any issues with things. Let us know if you've got any comments of things that you want and things that you're needing. In terms of where we're going next, I kind of touched on it before. We are going to take an incremental approach. We're not, we're getting 5.0 out stable, and then we're going to watch and see how things go and how people are giving us feedback. I think the thing that is most likely for the next step is putting an SQL backend onto it, probably the libsql one that we're already using in with AstroDB, possibly with an abstraction layer to make it pluggable, something with a local first SQLite kind of thing by default. This is the kind of initial thing that will unlock a lot of other stuff, maybe more powerful querying. We won't do that automatically. We will have a look and see, what is the best way of doing it. See whether that is something that people will find useful. And then maybe if it becomes useful and if it's something that makes sense, maybe start having things about being able to do updates in not just at build time. Because at the moment it's queries at build time and then you need to do a rebuild. Yeah. Now rebuilds are likely to be faster because this is cached in between builds and you can do incremental updates. But we know that people are going to want to have things that are updating, more quickly, and we would like to investigate the best way of doing that. We are not going to try and replace your live stock ticker or something like that, but maybe we want to plug in a way that when you edit your page in Hygraph, that it can send a notification and to a webhook and just update a single thing in a data space.
We have webhooks in Hygraph, absolutely.
I thought you might. They're very useful. But yes, so this is the kind of thing. At the moment, what you would do, use your webhook to hit Netlify or Vercel or whatever and do a build, and it will probably be pretty quick. Yeah. But this is one of the things that we're going to think about and see how it goes. But yeah, try it out. Let us know, give us feedback, and to try out the Astro 5.0 beta, and then just see how it's going.
Yeah, one of the worst things you can do as a project is try to rush into the next thing too quickly. I mean, so far we've released this as an experimental feature, which that's scary. People don't use those unless they're really, ambitious. And now it's in a beta. It's not even mainstream yet, right? Eventually we'll get to the point where it's in the stable. It is the main way to build content on Astro. And then the audience of using it's going to be massively larger. So the type of feedback we've been getting now is a very specific type of feedback from people who are really in the weeds. So we want to, take a moment to breathe and make sure it's working as good as it possibly can.
Yeah, absolutely. So real fast, I know we are at time. I've got to do my usual thing. If you want to talk more about the Hygraph loader, we do have a Slack community, slack.hygraph.com. Now, if people want to talk more about Astro loaders in general, where can they go to talk about that?
I believe it's astro.build/chat. Let me just double check, make sure that works. Yes. Astrobuild. Yeah. Astro.build/chat. That send you to our Discord.
/chat.
And we're all in there all day. That's where we
All day, every day.
That's where we all live. So yes, let us know if you've got your thoughts and hopes and dreams and complaints and everything about them, and we'll await the fire hose when we flick it over to stable.
Amazing. All right. Well, thanks so much for spending the time with us today, Matt Squared. And we'll see you in the Astro Discord. And rest assured, I've got more questions coming because I want to do more with this as well.
Well, we look forward to seeing you in there, and thanks for having us on your stream.
Thanks for building. That was a huge benefit to us. Is your ability to build that so quickly.
Like I said,
I think more than anything, having you building it and seeing the fact that you were building these things on stream and everything as well, and seeing what you've built has been a really useful thing to see, because you've been building it in public, and I can look at it and go, oh yeah, he's hit these particular issues. So yes, that's one thing I should add, particularly if you're building loaders. Please let me know. Go in Discord, tag me on Discord, because I really want to hear from people who are building loaders in particular. So yeah, thanks.
Amazing. All right. Well, thanks, y'all. Take care.
All right. Good to see you. Bye then.